we said, list all the people who you could call in the middle of the night if you were sick or scared. And some people had no one, including people who were married. And some people could list quite a number. And I think some of what we're talking about are the more intimate kind of safety net kind of people in our lives. Like, who are those people? Like, who could we really go to if we were in trouble? And what we find is that having somebody in your life like that seems to convey a great deal of that health benefit that we were talking about at the beginning. And that it's possible then to have all kinds of different kinds of friends in your life, but having at least one person, and ideally a few people, who have your back and you just feel like they're there for you. That's an essential component.
Very warm welcome to Cambridge Forum, coming to you live via Zoom. In a very depressing world beset by wars, climate disasters, and disease, we're going to invite you to escape this afternoon the pressing problems for an hour to focus on something positive, achievable, and beneficial for us all. I speak, of course, of friendship, an often underappreciated and until quite recently little researched topic. It's an area which, quite frankly, deserves a lot more of our time and attention. If I told you that by just having one positive friend, you could increase your life expectancy by 10 years, would you scoff at me or prick up your ears? Well, in fact, it's true. Today, we're going to delve into the deeper mysteries and unknown facts about friendship, and hopefully you will leave the forum in an hour, refreshed and ready to lengthen your life. Research is providing us with more and more proof that having friends is essential to our continued good health. Many people are aware of the detrimental effects that social isolation and loneliness can have on physical and mental well-being, but fewer of us appreciate the advantages of keeping important relationships close and personal. To help us understand the importance of friendship, we have two wonderful guests today. Dr. Bob Waldinger, a professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, based at MGH, therapist and Zen priest, and Dr. Yager, a sociologist, friendship expert, adjunct associate professor in the Department of Sociology at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, City University of New York, and author of numerous books, including Friendgevity, Making and Keeping Friends Who Enhance and Extend Your Life. Well, welcome to you both. Well, the scientific evidence seems to be pretty overwhelming. A 10-year study in Australia found older people with a large circle of friends were 22% less likely to die during the study period than those with fewer friends. In 2006, a study of nearly 3,000 nurses with breast cancer found women without close friends were 4 times as likely to die as those who had 10 or more close friends. Notably, proximity and the amount of contact wasn't associated with their survival. Just having the friends was protective. And in a 6-year study of Swedish men, being attached to a life partner didn't affect their risk of heart attack or fatal coronary heart disease, but having friends did. So let's start off first by welcoming you both. And Bob, you have been directing one of the longest running studies of adult life. And you say deep, meaningful relationships are linked with emotional well-being and physical health. Why are friendships key? And can you tell us a little more about your research and the science behind this finding?
Sure. So as far as we know, it's the longest study of the same lives that's ever been done. We're in our 84th year. We're still studying some of the same people who are still living, a few, and all of their children. But we started in 1938 with a group of Harvard College undergraduates and a group of young boys from Boston's poorest neighborhoods, and followed all of them all the way through their lives. And what we found were some of the most predictable things, that taking care of your health really matters in terms of living longer and staying healthy. But the surprising thing was that having friends, that warm relationships, not just made us happier. That wasn't the surprise. The surprise was that it keeps us healthy, that we're less likely to get the diseases of aging as soon, and people live longer if they have warmer relationships.
And the physiology of that, what happens in your body?
Well, there's a lot of research on that, and there are some good reigning hypotheses. So the best data has to do with relationships as stress regulators, as emotion regulators. The idea being that all of us get into fight or flight mode when we're stressed, and that's actually a good thing. You know, something, if we have to react to something. But most of us then come back to baseline, to a kind of calm baseline physiologically when the stressor is gone. But if we're isolated, or if we are in difficult, stressful relationships, we can stay in chronic fight or flight mode all the time. And what that does is it increases our circulating stress hormones. It puts us in a state of chronic inflammation. And so probably the best reigning hypothesis is that good relationships help us come back to baseline, help relieve stress.
So would the converse be true too? Are bad friends bad for your health? I mean, it certain research shows that certain behaviors, health behaviors, are mirrored in your friends. So if you're obese, your friends tend to get obese. If you exercise, they exercise. If you're anxious, they're anxious. So should we choose our friends carefully?
Yes, we should choose our friends carefully. And you're right. I mean, some of the really good work on social networks and behavior from Nick Christakis and many other investigators show that these behaviors are catching, they are contagious. And so, yes, if you are with people who are by and large less stressed, who take more care of themselves and each other, you're more likely to adopt those behaviors.
So there's some responsibilities that come with friendship as well as pleasurable aspects. Well, I'm going to switch over quickly to you, Jan. You've become a national authority really on friendship. You've written several books on this now, and they're full of lots of good advice and tips. Let's start with what you think constitutes a good friendship, and what, apart from the obvious pleasures of friendship, are the benefits of having a small group of close friends.
Well, a good friend is someone who lets you be the best you can be, and has unconditional love the way you want in love. However, a good friend also can let you know if you're going down the wrong path. So there should be honesty. You shouldn't feel like you're walking on eggshells. So that's a very important part of it. A good friend is someone where you see their text message, you can't wait to answer it. A warning sign that the friendship is not as great as it should be is if you start pulling away or keeping things to yourself. And that's another important part of good friendships, reciprocity. And it doesn't have to be reciprocity. A lot of times I also do friendship coaching, and someone will say to me, I'm always the one to pick what movie we're going to go to see, or I'm always the one to plan our get-togethers. And I'll say, well, does your friend do anything for you besides that? So, you know, it doesn't have to be a tit for tat, but there has to be a feeling that it's equal. And that's a very important part of it.
And do you think we have to devote time and attention to this nurturing? Is it something that we perhaps gotten a little lazy about?
Well, very much so. And what's interesting is in Frangevity, I did interview quite a few people who were dealing with friendship during the height of the pandemic. And practically everyone was very negative. And I even have a wonderful original artwork that an artist in Argentina did of two women talking through video conferencing, because that's what they had to do to keep their friendship going. But one woman, she went all the way to South America to a conference, and it was stopped because of the pandemic. So there were quite a few people from around the world, and instead of feeling sorry for themselves, they all got together and rented a house. And for the next 6 months, because they couldn't travel back to their countries, they hung out together, they developed friendships. They realized that the friendships they had back home weren't as close as they had hoped they would be. So you can turn even a negative, like being far away, into a positive with friendship, even though we know that a hug is important. And it's great to be able to do that when you can. But if you can't, you can still keep the friendship going, just as we're keeping our conversation going through Zoom.
Correct. Well, I wanted to ask you about the complacency factor, because I know we've got all these technological tools. And of course, this happened to go onto Zoom during COVID. Bob said he started seeing his clients on Zoom. And I was surprised when he told me that many of them have elected to stay virtual, which I know from the convenience factor is probably a good thing. But I thought the reassuring hand of the therapist was like God-given, the healer, the touch. And how has that segued for you just with dealing with clients?
Well, Mary, it's interesting. We never dreamed that you could do meaningful psychological work, therapy on Zoom. And if you had told me that 3 years ago, I wouldn't have believed it. But all of my colleagues who do psychotherapy of all flavors say that meaningful work is possible. And that's certainly been my experience. I see patients every day. I saw a patient just before we came on this webinar. And what we don't know is what's missing. So we know that it's better than we thought it would be, but we don't know all of the aspects of interaction that get filtered out by these virtual platforms. And I think that's going to be an area of really important research over the next few years as more of our interactions are virtual. So I think the bottom line is better than most of us thought it was going to be, but not the same. And we're not quite sure how it's not the same.
Well, I want to use myself as an example with work friendships. I thought about this recently, that even though teaching online is going great, I don't have one new work friendship since I don't go into the school the way I used to. All of the work friendships I created were the professors that I met in the hall, and we happened to have the same schedule. So we went out for lunch together. And at that coffee shop, I happened to see Bruce Willis sitting there. And it was like, whoa, Bruce Willis is in the coffee shop. So you have these shared experiences. So I think that it's on a certain level that you can either make new relationships or keep them going. But I'm finding that there isn't that same kind of connection. And I think that's what Bob is talking about, that we're going to have to research, how do we try to make up for what is missing?
One of my colleagues who works with people on the autism spectrum has said that, in fact, many of those people feel like they're doing better on Zoom. because the rules are clearer, there's more predictability. And so, as with everything, one size never fits all. And we're finding that for some of us, we miss the spontaneity of being able to just go out to lunch with friends on the spur of the moment at work. And for others, it's a relief to have these orderly little boxes that we all sit in. And we raise our hands virtually.
I can understand that, actually. If someone was autistic, they would have much more control in this situation. And if they wanted to exit, they could just hit exit.
But I found that going back before Zoom in the 90s, when I was doing the research for what became When Friendship Hurts, that people who had they were self-conscious about themselves in some way, either their weight or in some cases they were in a wheelchair. They found communicating through Facebook and the internet was more comfortable than in person. So I think that the movement to the video platform is really an extension of that. And as Bob says, it's so important that people find what works for them. You know, there is no one size fits all. But going back to friendship, you want the friends to be in agreement with that. You know, if someone needs to have a cup of coffee and neither one has COVID and it's safe to get together, they either get the cup of coffee or the friend says, okay, you want to talk on the phone? Well, I'll find someone who does want to get together.
Yeah, I think I'm old school in this respect. I think that the face-to-face, literally in person, is very hard to substitute. And I wonder about people, particularly young people, that lost that couple of years of reading cues and all the stuff you're taking in your brain's processing when you're in the presence of somebody else that is not apparent. I mean, obviously this is better than texting, way better, but it's not the same for me as in person.
Sure.
One of the elements that's really different is emotion. So we know emotion is contagious. I mean, if you've ever walked into a room and everybody's angry at each other, but you don't even know what's been said, you can tell. And certainly if you're sitting with someone who's angry or anxious, you can begin to feel it yourself. And a lot of that gets filtered on virtual platforms. So one of the things we know we lose is emotional communication in certain channels. So we have to understand more about what that means for our relationships, and also what it means for reading each other and social skills. You know, how do we read each other when some of that emotional communication gets filtered out?
Okay, can we think about other options in terms of relationships now? If you, as many people did, got a pet during the pandemic and poured all your love and attention and care into this cat or dog or bird or whatever it was, would you say that you get the same health benefits from stroking a cat or a dog licking your face as you, or maybe no one studied it, but do you think there are benefits attached to another living entity being with you? That's not quite the same as a human interaction, but.
Well, in my first book, Friendships, I interviewed a woman who, at that point, the only close relationship in her life was with her dog. And it definitely kept her from being totally isolated and feeling connected. I think they've done research on, especially the elderly who are isolated, cats, dogs, you know, they make a huge difference. So, you know, going back to there's no one size fits all, it's also nice to add that to the mix. You know, having a dog or a cat or a frog or even a snake is better than being totally isolated, but let's add to that a friend, and, you know, let's, if possible, even add a romantic relationship. I don't think you need to have it exclusive, that a rather famous interviewer said, boys come and romantic partners come and go, but friends are forever. Well, we don't believe that anymore. Friends can come and go too. So it's really a question of, who are the people in your life that you count on? Are they there for you? What are your communication skills like? I found a part of friendgevity. Do you argue constantly with your friends? Don't do that if you want to live longer. And there was a study of 10,000 men and women who found that arguing with a friend actually could lead to shortening your life. So, it's a case by case basis, which is what makes it exciting. That there isn't. And by the way, Bob, I watched your wonderful TED Talk. I would love to have over 400,000 book sales, the way you have over 400,000 views. And what's wonderful is that finally
it's 42 million views.
Oh, 42 million. Oh, okay. Even better.
Sorry.
But I'd love to have, it's wonderful that you finally got women in the study, because the first 50 years it was only men.
Yeah. When I came on in 2002, and we brought in first the spouses of the original men, and then starting 8 years ago, we started studying all the children, and fortunately, more than half are women. So.
Yeah, well, it's important because over the years, I've always interviewed men and women, and there are dramatic differences in male and female friendships. Now, a lot of people fault men that a lot of men fall into the spouse becoming the best friend once they're married. But a lot of times that's transitional. During those years when they have young children and they're juggling the wife, the children, and the job. And then as the children get older, they start to go back to the basketball games and the poker games, and, in addition to the wife and the children. And also, women are becoming more like men in that they're getting a little bit more reticent about sharing everything about their emotions with friends, because they too want to climb up the ladder, because one of the reasons men will hold back is they're worried that they may say something that could be used against them. So there's a lot of trust issues that have to be worked out.
One thing we found, we reviewed the friendship patterns of men and women, all the research literature, just like the last 2 or 3 months. And in this review, what we found was that even though there's been a great deal of publicity about how men's and women's friendships are so different, when you look at big, rigorous studies, they're not nearly as different as they've been described. So Lillian Rubin did a lot of the original work talking about how different they were, but it turns out that they're not really as different as some of the popular writing stereotypes them to be. And that's useful to know, because both in terms of men's desires and men's greater connectedness than sometimes we give them credit for. Connected.
It's interesting that you've raised this, because this was my next question about how men and women are wired in terms of friendship. So the Oxford research I was reading shows that women like to have 1.5 intimate relationships, and the 0.5 is usually their best friend, whereas men tend to put all their interest into the love partner one-on-one. And then today I was reading in the New York Times an article that as men get older, they tend to be less good at building and maintaining relationships, and they're more likely to end up struggling with all sorts of issues, substance abuse, mental illness, homelessness. So my question, I guess, is why is this? And is it something that we can nurture if it's actually nature? Is it something we can nurture? Because I've always noticed that women tend to have more and regular interaction with their friends than men. Would you go along with that, Jan? Or?
Well, I found that early on, the average number of friends in the network that I studied was 1 to 2 best friends, 4 to 6 close friends. And initially it was 10 to 20 close casual friends. But then in starting with Facebook in the 2000s, it escalated to 20 to 50 casual friends. And I think that casual friends are not given as much benefit as they do have for us. But I also discovered something interesting when I was doing my work on work relationships. I came up with the name workships. And that's a work relationship that's more than a coworker, but less than a friend. And a lot of the men friendships start off in the workplace. And then once someone leaves the company or even the career, then they'll see if the workship will become a tried and true friendship. So, I think that a lot of men have, I know my father, he had one friend his whole life, but it was a solid friendship going back to the age of 5. And part of it is time management. Good friendship takes time. You've got to be there for all those important events, weddings, births, children's birthdays. I mean, you can't juggle too many of those, because if you start sending a gift and not showing up, you're going to start seeing your status lowering. So time is a factor.
Mary, one common theory that I think gets borne out in some of the research is that women are more socialized to, from the time they're young, from the time they're girls, to interact in conversation. Their play is different in that way, and that boys are more socialized to do instrumental things and activities together. Boys may play basketball together, and women may play house together. And that those patterns, those socialization patterns, are often continue into the kinds of things that friends do together as adults. So women may share more emotionally, and men may do more things together instrumentally. And those are just patterns that shift over the life cycle.
We've got some questions coming in here, which actually mirror some of the questions that I was going to bring up about the magic number of friends. Someone's asked here, is there a magic number of such close friendships, 1 to 5, 5 to 10? Well, you've just kind of addressed that, Jan.
Yeah.
Well, the other part I want to add is it's as many as you can handle.
Yeah.
Because if you have a best friend if you live in New York City and you have a best friend in New York City, that's great. If you have another best friend that has moved to South Africa, you can still keep that best friendship going without any conflict. But if you have 2 best friends in the same city and they both are having a crisis, and you need to choose which one are you going to go there and be there and hold their hand, that's when it can get a little sticky. So that's why the 1 to 2 for best friends seems to be a good number. But close friends is a larger number because it doesn't have the same requirements.
I'd like to offer a different view based on my understanding of like thousands of lives now, which is that there is no magic number. It's not at all. And then,
that's what I said, by the way, when I said it's what you can handle.
Right, and that we define, and that we set out a number at our peril, right? Because we're all on a spectrum, from people who are more introverted to people who are more extroverted. And introverts find lots of people in their lives stressful, and actually that may shorten their lives. And actually, for an introvert, one person may be all they need and all they want. Extroverts may love having lots of good friends. And that what we're really talking about, as you said, Jan, is this idea that it really depends temperamentally on what suits us. And so I just want to urge all of the listeners not to search for a particular number as the right number. Each person defines for themselves what the right number feels like.
Okay, let me come in here with Robin Dunbar, the Oxford evolutionary psychologist, who's done a lot of work on this because he's looked in social bonding in primates and humans, done a lot of work. And he's come up with this very famous now number of 150. That's the absolute maximum outer limit on our social networks that we can have. And our small close group, he says, is around 5.
Yeah.
That's really what we see in social groups. And here's another interesting chap. Dan Buttner is a National Geographic Fellow, and he studies healthy habits, social networks, and blue zones. They're the regions of the world where people live extra long lives. So they're doing something right. And he says, quote, curate your immediate social network and focus on 3 to 5 real world friends instead of distant Facebook friends. So I wanted to each of you ask, Jan, you go for it and then I'll ask Bob what you think of that. Is a friend in the hand better than 100 on Facebook?
Oh, well, you know the answer to that. I had a birthday brunch for a milestone birthday a couple of years ago. And I think there were 5 or 6 friends there. And, it was great. I didn't want to go for the party with 50. And it's interesting because someone I know through business, she had a party for her milestone and it was a lower number, but I thought she and I were friends, not just work ships. And I wasn't invited to the party.
Oh, wow.
And she told me that the restaurant had a very firm cutoff. And what was the cutoff? 50.
Oh.
So I hadn't made the 50 cut.
Oh, dear.
So,
oh, dear.
So I think it goes back to what Bob and I have been talking about. It really depends. I have a friend she's one of my close friends. She's not my best friend anymore. She used to be my best friend in our 20s, but our lives went in different directions. But she's still a close friend. She's able to juggle 10 close friends. That's her skill. She can do it.
Does she do anything else? Does she
she's works in the theater, but she's very, she bicycle rides around Manhattan and she's always busy. And, but that would be a lot for me, because I wrote a list of the friends I care about who I want to send Mother's Day cards to. And it was a manageable list, or I'd go broke if it was 50.
At one point in our study, we asked our participants, we said, list all the people who you could call in the middle of the night if you were sick or scared. And some people had no one, including people who were married. And some people could list quite a number. And I think some of what we're talking about are the more intimate kind of safety net kind of people in our lives. Like, who are those people? Like, who could we really go to if we were in trouble? And what we find is that having somebody in your life like that seems to convey a great deal of that health benefit that we were talking about at the beginning. And that it's possible then to have all kinds of different kinds of friends in your life, but having at least one person, and ideally a few people, who have your back and you just feel like they're there for you. That's an essential component.
And I want to shift things a little because one of the reasons I wrote Friendgevity is that When Friendship Hurts, my book before that, it dealt with the emotional disappointments, even sometimes romantic type of, betrayals, but it didn't really get at the nitty gritty. And I think when we talk about friendship extending your life, we also have to talk about how it can end your life. And what made me think about this so dramatically is that in 2017, my husband's great nephew got into the car to go out with his friend for drinks on a Friday night. That's what 23 and 25-year-olds do. And unfortunately, the driver crashed the car, and our great nephew was killed instantly. The driver got 6 to 12 years for in state prison for reckless driving and driving under the influence, among other issues. And I have a whole chapter in Friendjevity called Frenemies and Fatal Friends, because too many people only look at friendship in a Pollyannish way. Oh, this friend's going to extend my life. Oh, friendship's great. I have someone to talk to and confide in. But there are life-changing issues related to friendship, like what happened to our great nephew. Is the person that asked you to get in that car gonna, are you just gonna have a fun night out, or is it gonna be the end? I have a whole file of stories, best friend cheerleaders, killed in a crash, friend giving someone drugs that turns out to be, laced with fentanyl, kills the friend. So I think that it's important when you talk about friendjevity and longevity and friendship to look at the good friends and the bad friends. And the bad friends may not just give you a stomach ache or make you feel depressed, but they can also, there's a famous case, she went to prison where she actually sadly cajoled her friend into committing suicide.
Oh, right.
That was a very famous
network
case,
yeah.
and I think even Massachusetts possibly.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important, we want to keep it a nice, upbeat, light conversation, but I think it's very important to, too many people see friendship as an extra that's thrown into your life rather than a really key part of all our lives.
Well, what you're pointing to is the need to pay attention to whether someone really has your interests at heart, whether someone really wants to take care of you or wants a partner in some foolish, reckless endeavor.
Thelma and Louise,
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and it's interesting because I teach penology at John Jay, among victimology and other courses. And over the years, my students always have to do an interview. And I can't tell you how many of those interviews are about, so-and-so led me on down the garden path. I had to do time in juvie because I got involved with the wrong friend. This friend was shoplifting and they talked me into doing it, so there's a lot of that.
So we've got a question here. What do you suggest when someone you had considered a friend drifts away? If the person has removed themselves, is that usually indicative that he or she doesn't want further contact? I don't know whether to pursue any further conversation, ask directly if they're offended by something I said or did, or just move on. In the pandemic, my life telescoped down and a lot of fringe relationships fell away. Is that a common experience? So we got two questions there. Should you confront something and address it, or just let it kind of peter out? And secondly, resurrecting relationships that drifted during the pandemic. So.
Well, I think the first issue is, how important is this friendship to you, the one who's drifted away? And is it once you do decide that it's important enough to say, hey, I miss you, I value your friendship, what's going on? If they give you an answer that you can work with, great. They may just not want to answer you. They may ghost you. So at a certain point, you just have to take the hint and move on.
So
But a lot of people found the pandemic scaled down their friendships and showed them who was going to be there for them.
Yeah, it's kind of a risk benefit calculation. What do I risk losing if I don't try to explore this friendship and keep it alive? And what do I risk if I reach out? And so certainly if you let it go, you won't get it back by being silent. You will get the friendship back. You will revive it often by reaching out and just being curious. We haven't talked in a while. What's going on for you? Often we imagine things about friendships that aren't true. And so simply being curious first, not assuming we know why someone stopped being in contact, but just asking the simple question may give us answers that are surprising and don't have much to do with us. And that can be a great relief.
That's interesting, but I do think you should only go for so long on that path. If you're
you don't want to
flogging
be
a dead horse, as we say.
Well, you also today you don't want to be accused of stalking someone.
Oh, well, I didn't think of that, but of course, yeah, that's another possible.
Yeah. Well, also the other thing is put the shoe on the other foot. In When Friendship Hurts, I talk about some of the skills when something is is this a failed friendship? Is this something you can salvage? And one of the skills is to pretend you're at a movie theater and you're watching the movie. And what if that was you, what would you want to have happen? Would you want to be confronted? Would you want to just have, and that's another part of it, cooling out. Sometimes what you think is a pulling away is just, hey, let me chill this out and see if I go back to them and things get back on track. So sometimes confrontation can backfire because it does that, it makes it concrete. So that's another issue. Has it been a week? Has it been a month? Has it been 6 months? Was there something specific that happened, or are they busy? Did they have a baby? Did they, have something happen that you weren't tuned into? So once again, there's no one answer for everything. So you've got to really try to judge, how does this person feel about confrontation? They may be the last person in the world that you want to be asking things about. Someone else may say, great, I'm so glad you asked me. Let's talk about it.
The other thing is you can lead with why you're reaching out. You can simply say, I've missed you. That's not a confrontation. It's just, gee, I've missed you and I'd like to be in touch again.
Which takes the onus off there being some kind of thing that precipitated this.
Exactly.
Yeah. We've got a really great question here, because I was going to ask, well, one thing is we haven't really talked about how things might change with age and life experience. We live a lot longer now. People move around the country, people move around the world. I mean, it's quite hard work to maintain good friendships, and you have to make the time. But before we move to that, Miguel from Spain has written, is there any country or culture in the world that may be ranked as number one concerning the value of loyalty and commitment with the value of friendship? Great question. So while you're thinking about that, I did read today that in Japan, where the average life expectancy is about 90 for women, people form these things called MOAs. You might know of them. They're groups of 5 people friends who offer social, logistic, emotional, and even financial support for a lifetime, which is wonderful. I don't know if they put it in writing, but anyway, it works.
Well, over the years, I've interviewed quite a few networks like that. They started in middle school. That's why middle school is such an important time, because your personality is already being formed and you're able to get together with people without as much interaction as with the parents, or in high school or college. And I've interviewed groups that go on annual retreats from college for 20 years. My best friend, Joyce, she's in a sorority. When she retired, she had a wonderful party at a hotel. She had 40 of her sorority sisters from college at that party, in addition to her colleagues and her friends and family. Americans, there are people like that. I had a friend from Venezuela.
Don't you think that's a cultural thing they've actually taken on board? It's a practice that they do in Japan. It's not
Mary,
just...
Yes, Dan Buettner of the Blue Zones studied that culture. And they're assigned in these villages. They're assigned at age 5.
They're assigned them? Oh, yeah. Goodness.
Their friend group is assigned.
Oh, so it's not even a chosen thing.
And it's quite wonderful. He has these videos of these women in their 90s, and they're the same groups that they were when they were 5 years old. And the instruction is, these are going to be your friends. These are going to be the people you can call if you're sick or scared in the middle of the night. And it works. And Dan's idea.
Well, I prefer what my friend Joyce does, where she's chosen them from her sorority sisters.
Absolutely.
So I don't really want to get into
No, I
Japan.
think culturally it's a great idea.
Yeah,
it's a great divide.
I don't like the idea of being told when I'm 5 that there are 5 people that I have to interact with for the rest of my life.
Dan, that's not the point of this. The point of this is that there are cultures, and I think that's where the man who asked the question,
Spanish.
That's what he was talking about, that there are cultures that prioritize this.
And so do we.
Actually, we don't necessarily prioritize this. There are certainly parts of our culture where we don't prioritize it. And I think the question is, are there countries in the world where this is more of a priority? It's a good question. One thing you might do, the questioner, you might look up the World Happiness Report. Every year, the United Nations publishes a report. You can get it online, the United Nations World Happiness Report. And they have studies of how different countries compare in their social engagement, in their community involvement. And that you might find that interesting if you're looking at how different parts of the world prioritize or don't prioritize.
Well, I want to share something very important, because one of the insights I got from all my research is how going from a friendship pair, to a triad often backfires. And I think that's one of the takeaways I want our listeners to know, that the structure of friendship can have as much to do with intimacy as the age or the gender. So keep that in mind. Sometimes when you have a pair and it's going well and you say, oh, it'll be more efficient, let me bring in my third friend. Well, a lot of times it doesn't go well. It backfires. So I think that's important for people to know. I think learning about the friendship patterns in America, or if you're from around the world, I was going to mention my friend from Venezuela. I interviewed her on friendship. And what was so amazing was I asked her, if you were working with a friend and the boss said that there's something about the friendship that isn't working, what would you do? And she said that the friendship would come before the work. And a lot of Americans wouldn't say that. You know, they would say, oh, my job comes first.
By the way, there was another, this is just a random thing. I was reading a Guardian piece, and it was entitled "The Island Where Nobody Dies." And it was about a man who was living here. He was Greek by birth, and he was given a diagnosis of lung cancer. And they said, you know, not good, probably 6 months. And he decided to forego all treatment. He went back to this little Greek island, basically to die, moved into his parents' house with his parents and started just gardening, and then resurrected the friendships that he had had in the village. And 2.5 decades later, he's still there gardening away, happy as anything on the Greek island, which calls into question, you know, the therapy that he got from that environment. It was the cure. You know, being cared for by people that were, you know, able to speak his language, shared his interest in growing stuff. Simple as it sounds, worked. I thought it was a lovely piece. Lovely piece.
Well, and Mary, sometimes doctors are wrong in their diagnosis.
True. True. All right, quick one. This is a very important one here. Jude says, has social media helped or hurt friendships in general and the depth of friendship in particular? It's a great question. What do you think?
I've actually found, when I started researching friendgevity, I thought it had hurt it. But from the interviews I did, and I surveyed over 800 people from around the world, it actually has been helping people. And I think what's important is that people got very savvy quickly. If you found out, if you got engaged, they learned you call your closest friends and you tell them, and then you post it on Facebook. You don't let your close network feel like they've become part of this broader group. So people have learned how to make it work for their relationships. I think early on it was hurting people more, but as they learned how to make it work for them, going back to what I said about my nephew, my great nephew who passed away from the friendship related situation, his father posted on Facebook about the tragedy, and there were 1,000 people at his son's funeral. And that would have been a lot harder to pull off if you didn't have the power of friendship and Facebook.
Well, one of the things we're learning is that much depends on how you use the internet, how you use social media. So if you use it to connect with people in the way you were describing, Jan, where you connect, you let people know what's happening in your life, and then people show up in real time, in real life, that's an active use of social media to connect. There's another way that we often use social media, which is essentially doom scrolling, looking at other people's curated lives. Though that makes us feel worse, it often makes us feel more isolated. It often lowers self-esteem. So what we find is that the more active use, where we reach out to friends and maintain connections, that active use strengthens friendships and it elevates mood. And the more passive use has the reverse effect.
But I don't want to miss, one of the questions was about spouses.
Yeah, I just noticed
and
that.
And I think that's very important because I interviewed a woman years ago who was best friends with a man for 10 years. And she was very upset because he had gotten married and his new wife said, unfortunately, yeah, I'm paraphrasing, but the gist of it was, unfortunately, I can't handle your friendship with so-and-so. And she just was, said, oh, this marriage isn't going to work out. How could he do this to me? And I think that it's very important to understand that, going back to one size doesn't fit all, there are spouses who are fine with their romantic partner having a platonic relationship, either a new one or a long-standing one. And there are others who it does make them jealous. And we're not talking about jealousy like a domestic violence kind of control freak situation. It just doesn't feel comfortable. So some of the ways to deal with that is and not even with opposite sex friendships, even with same sex friendship, get together with your friends without your spouse, without making a big deal about it. You don't have to brag about it or, drag couples into it if the four people don't get along. But in friendships, I talk about marriage a lot because it is one of the biggest friendships. There's very few people who will say that getting married didn't impact their friendship in some way.
Interesting. What do you think?
One of my colleagues, Eli Finkel, has written a book called The All or Nothing Marriage, in which he talks about the kind of modern ideal that you're supposed to be able to get everything you need from your spouse, from your romantic partnership, and that this is most often not the case in most couples, but that it can lead people to have false expectations and then be disappointed because they're not able to get everything they need from a spouse. And so the idea is that when partners have more realistic expectations, they're not threatened by spouses having friendship networks and relying on friends for certain essential things in their lives.
I think that's always a tricky one. The perfect platonic relationship. It invariably leads to some form of imbalance. That's my experience. Very few people are able to cope with it because the possibility of it being more than friendship is always lurking, unless you're terribly stable and very trusting and established. Correct? Would you agree with that?
Are you talking about
mixed when you've got a heterosexual?
I see. Right.
You've got a heterosexual person.
Yeah.
And they've got a male heterosexual friend outside the marriage. It can be a stressor.
But many times spouses are threatened by, friendships where there isn't sexual attraction, where there's no real possibility.
Right. Just the time thing that they have.
It's the time thing. And that's,
well, I think it goes to, just handling it in a way that it doesn't become an issue. That's really, it doesn't matter if it's, taking up cooking or going out with a friend. It's a question of how you incorporate it into your life so that if the husband or the wife is getting all she or he needs, they're not going to be threatened by it. So it's really a question of, making it work. And, but I in friendships, I have an anecdote where there was this couple at my old building in Manhattan, and they were everything to each other. And when the husband died, it was so sad because within a few months, his wife who had no friends and her children were too busy to get together with her. And she was only in her mid to late 50s, but she so deteriorated that the family had to hire a nurse to take care of her. And I used to see her walking up and down the street. And I always knew that if she just had some kind of a friendship network, because even if you're the happiest married person in the world, statistically, one of the spouses is going to pass away before the other, and they will need a network to lift them up while they make the transition to whatever happens after that.
So we've only got like a minute. So I think we're all agreed that we should definitely seek out and keep good, close friends and nurture them, because our health and their health depends upon it, right? It's a mutual
Well,
win-win.
25 years ago, I started International New Friends, Old Friends Week. And it's the first Sunday, it's the Sunday after Mother's Day in America. And it lasts for a whole week. And I did it because I knew instinctively that as time went on, more and more women were not going to have a mother to celebrate Mother's Day with, but they would have their friends.
Yes,
No,
you make the friends. Go ahead.
Mary, one take home, I think, from this too, is that it's really worth paying attention, doing a kind of maintenance of friendships, almost like the way we would maintain our physical health, that we go to the gym and we exercise, and we don't just do it once and then say, oh, my body will take care of itself now. I did my workout. We really make choices each day, each week, to make sure that we stay in touch, that we nurture those relationships that are important to us. They don't just take care of themselves. And I think that's one of the take homes that's worth putting out there for our listeners.
Very, very good. And pick up these books because they're full of lots of good exercises, tips, lists that you can do that actually will make you more aware. And I think that's huge, aware of the nature of your friendships and maybe what you're lacking or they're lacking or whatever it is. But you're doing a very good inventory of your health and well-being, I think, right? You're as good as your friends, I'd say. Okay, well, I would like to keep talking, but an hour has actually flown by. And I'd like to thank our wonderful guest today, Dr. Bob Waldinger, sorry, Bob, and Dr. Jan Yager, for bringing this wonderful insight and advice on this topic, which is very important to everyone. And spread the word, and you can rewatch this. It will be out on a podcast, it'll be out on a video on GBH Forum Network on YouTube shortly, and it will also be edited into NPR radio broadcasts, so you can get more than one chance to revisit the topic.
And I want to invite people to send me an email at jyager@aol.com with your questions, comments, or feedback. Love to hear from you.
Great. We'll type that into the chat box there for people.
Yes, and I'm happy to hear from people as well. Please put my email into the chat.
Great, we'll do that. Okay, I'm just going to say thank you. Cambridge Forum is made possible through the generosity of Herbert and Dorothy Vetter, the Lowell Institute, the Massachusetts Cultural Council, and Cambridge Community Foundation, and you. So if you want to donate, please feel free to send a check or go on PayPal on the website, www.cambridgeforum.org, or just sign up to get members' information. It doesn't cost anything, no obligation. And you'll find lots of good podcasts there and other links to videos that we've done over the last 53 years that we've been doing this, believe it.
Wow.
Not me personally,
impressive.
But the organization. So thank you again for all coming on board, audience members, and your comments and questions. They were great. And the next forum's on May 3rd. Details are on the website. Can we resist the hijacking of American democracy? So we go from lightweight to heavy weight. Well, this isn't lightweight, but it was fun and it was nice to have something good to talk about. So I thank you very much.
And thank you for inviting me, and nice to meet you, Bob.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Jan. It was fun, Mary. Enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.